So, what a truly beautiful way to begin our day. I watched an interview of the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, and for both these wonderful world leaders, the busier the day, the more important the meetings, the longer they would spend. You know, for the Dalai Lama in meditation, and for Desmond Tutu in prayer before the day began, and how the world has benefited from their deep wisdom and commitment to inner peace. Just last night, I was part of a sutta contemplation, and one of the participants was sharing that with the outbreak of increased violence this past week on the world stage, there had arisen within them this even deeper commitment to non-violence, to non-harm within their own life. And I thought that was a very, very useful response. So this morning, we'll cover one last question from the audience before next week beginning a series on the gradual training, which really is the Buddha's eightfold noble path in a human life. What does that look like? And Sanghamita and I'll take turns spending several weeks exploring that. But for this morning, the question is, and hopefully it's of interest to people listening, is there such thing as sin in Buddhism? How does one truly know or measure right and wrong? So, two-part question. So, is there such thing as sin in Buddhism? No. That being said, what is sin? And I don't want to do a heavy theological. So I just looked up in the dictionary. And the definition is that it's got two parts to it. That it's a transgression of a law of God or law of nature, and that it comes with a punishment. There's like an atonement needing to be made. And that landed for me, coming from a Christian background. Most of us here probably are from a Christian or Judaic background. So that idea of sin, no. This idea of transgressing God's law and it needing to cause some kind of an atonement, some kind of a payment. This whole idea of sacrifice. This way of thinking actually is becoming less and less tenable as we've moved into the scientific age. And so even now, I'll give an example. So with this definition of sin, you can have a victimless crime, because sort of the victim would be God. So an example would be two women falling in love and having a relationship, or two men falling in love and having a consensual relationship, love relationship, romantic relationship. With this definition of sin, it would be breaking God's law. But where I'm going with this is, no one actually is suffering. In fact, perhaps these two people are the opposite of suffering. So this idea of suffering, this idea of a specific direct harm being caused. This is the criteria for what's right and what's wrong in the Buddha's teachings. And that's what I hope that we can explore, me, you listening, explore this morning. So, interestingly, even in the abortion movement and the anti-gay movement, the opponents are moving in this direction of realizing they can't just say, well, this is breaking God's law. So now they bring in that they're suffering. They're suffering because of people's actions, because of their religious beliefs. But they're trying to, it's very interesting. The world is catching up with the litmus test, the criteria that the Buddha laid out over 2,500 years ago, which is you can tell what's not right, what's wrong, by looking at harm, looking at suffering. So sin, no, and this idea of punishment, no, but the idea of transgression, the idea of right and wrong, yes, in the Buddhist teachings. And the Pali word is kusala, which means wholesome, or often gets translated as wholesome. Sometimes it gets translated as skillful. And then the negation is akusala. And so in the Pali language, which is related to Sanskrit, is a negation. And the Pali's related to Sanskrit. Most of our modern languages are related to Sanskrit. So even English. So we have like agnostic. We also have this negation in English. So kusala and akusala. And I'll probably use kusala, akusala, wholesome, unwholesome, skillful, unskillful, throughout the talk this morning. And so the Buddha, in his own spiritual journey, in the middle length discourses, the Majjhima Nikaya, Sutta number 19, where it talks about two kinds of thought. That's the title of the sutta. And the Buddha came up with this understanding from just doing what we were just doing, sitting in meditation and watching his own mind really carefully. And he realized that he could actually divide his thoughts into these two camps. One that was kusala, wholesome, skillful, and one that was akusala, unwholesome, unskillful. And the reason he knew that one was skillful and one was unskillful was because of the effect that it had, the effect that it was having on him, his own mind, body, mood, heart, energy, and his effect on other people. And so he says that when I allow the mind to just hang out in these certain kinds of thoughts, it leads to my own affliction, the affliction of others, and the affliction of both. And then he got, he looked more closely and got even more specific, that he could identify this painful, unhelpful, unbeneficial way of thinking and feeling and reacting to the world, as having three root causes: thoughts that were based in sensual desire, thoughts that were based in ill will, and thoughts that were based in confusion. And sorry, the first one is greed. It's not just sensual desire. Thoughts that were rooted in greed, thoughts that were rooted in ill will, and thoughts that were rooted in delusion, confusion, perplexity. And we've probably, I'm certain we've all experienced that. And even that state of being confused, very, very painful state. Like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what happened. I don't know why I said that. I don't know how I feel. Like it, yeah. And likewise, the ones that were leading to benefit, that were not leading to harm, is beautiful. The Buddha says that they're just simply the absence, non-greed, non-ill will, and non-confusion. Very, very powerful. So this is the Buddha's guardrails, guidelines. What are those things when the planes are coming in? They're those.
Landing strip?
Landing strip, and then there's the guy, or maybe a lady, a woman, anyway, with the lights. Maybe it's not like that anymore. There's probably a machine doing it. But that's what greed, ill will, confusion, and non-greed, non-ill will, non-confusion. These are the and you can tell that they're rooted in those things because of what's happening, because of the effect that they're having. And when we start to meditate, and when we start to watch our thoughts, watch the movements of our mind and our mood, and become more sensitive, we start to see, oh yeah, when I'm greed is the most interesting one. It's not hard to convince people that when you're feeling ill will, it's painful. We know what that feels like. And we know the effect it has in our lives and in our relationship. But greed, the world is operating on greed. And, it's supposed to be a great thing, have it your way. It's a radio station named Crave. Like, this is great. Sometimes you read the descriptions of like some innocuous chocolate bar, and it's just like, oh my gosh, like it's supposed to like deliver so much. But when you start to watch, you realize, oh my gosh, when I'm feeling greed, I'm feeling a lack. I want something more, something else, something different. And we can see that even in our relationships, when I start wanting someone, don't use that word, don't close the door so loud. Like, this is all, well, I guess actually, sorry, that's ill will. But it is, they're actually the same thing. It's like not wanting and wanting. So they are very related. So getting even more specific, the Buddha's definition of what is wholesome in a human life, he gets very specific, and the most basic are these 5 precepts. And they're very beautiful. They're training rules. They're not commandments. You're not hurting God. You're trying to live a life that is wholesome, and this leads to lots and lots of contentment and well-being. And so the 5 precepts are not killing, not stealing, not misusing your sexual energy, which really is the first 2 precepts in the sexual arena. Not causing harm with your sexual energy, and not taking what's not given with your sexual energy. And then not lying. And the 5th precept is not so much ethical. It's more realistic and supportive for keeping precepts. And that is to not intoxicate the mind, not taking drugs and alcohol that cause the mind to get clouded and be heedless. So in the suttas, there are many times that you actually just see the first 4 that are the ethical ones. And then, I don't know, I haven't counted if it's half the time or more than half the time, the 5th precept is there as well. And the Buddha says, when we take stock of our lives and truly start to use these training guidelines, take them on board and take them and start to begin to work with them and try and live by them. In the numerical discourses, the Buddha says about the 5 precepts, 5 gifts are great. That is keeping these 5 precepts. They give to countless sentient beings the gift of freedom from fear, enmity, and ill will, and they themselves enjoy unlimited freedom from fear. They themselves, the ones that are following these 5 precepts. They themselves enjoy unlimited freedom from fear, overflowing merit, overflowing goodness. They nurture happiness. So it's absolutely beautiful. It's exquisite that when we commit to living a life that is ethical based on this concept of harm and non-harm for ourselves and for others, that we begin to give give the gift of freedom from fear to all the people that we come in contact with. In other words, we become a safe person. We become someone who's reliable. I mean, overarchingly, like, of course we fall short, but the overall orientation, direction of our hearts and minds and of our lives is one towards benefit, one towards non-harm. And this gives a gift of fearlessness to all beings. Now, of course, we do transgress. We do fall short. I think the Hebrew word sin, one translation of it could be that I think it gets to a nuance, is this idea of missing the mark. The difference between the idea of sin is that the mark is something that God has laid down, and you're missing the mark and then you're hurting God. Whereas in Buddhism, the litmus test is harm to oneself and to other. But this idea of missing the mark certainly exists, because we're talking about human beings and we're talking about ourselves, and we know. So the second part of the definition of sin, this idea of punishment, it's not only not in Buddhism, it's actively the opposite. It's absolutely the opposite. In Buddhism, sorry, I keep saying in Buddhism, I want to say what the Buddha teaches. What the Buddha teaches is that, I'll give a quote actually. I hope I have it. I do. I'll give you an example. This is in the suttas so many times. When someone has transgressed, they've not lived up to the training principle. You know, they've lied, or they've taken something that wasn't given, etc., etc. As far as the Buddha is concerned, as soon as you realize, oh my gosh, one of the ways you realize is that it just doesn't feel good. This is the response of the Buddha when somebody is coming forward and saying, I messed up, you know, I did this thing. The Buddha says, we forgive you. This is a formula I'm quoting right now from the Middle Length Discourses 65 to a monk, actually a disciple of the Buddha's, Badali. But this exchange and this response that the Buddha gives is many, many times in the suttas. So Badali comes and says, oh, I've transgressed. And the Buddha says, we forgive you, for it is growth in the noble one's discipline when one sees one's transgression as such and makes amends in accordance with the Dhamma by undertaking restraint in the future. So it's all got this positive momentum. It's all forward leading. There's sort of a parent, I think, sorry, not a parent, I mean, someone that is a parent who understands this with a child. When a child is coming forward with something that, you know, they've broken a family rule or a house rule, or broken an object in the house, whatever. When a child is coming forward, punishment is like, this needs to be very, very not in the room. This is something to celebrate. You are seeing, and you're coming clean, you're coming forward. This is something that, for me, when I was parenting, this was like one of the number one ways that my children got praise from me, is to come out into the open. In fact, even that expression, bringing out into the open, is one that when you become a monk or a nun, every moon day you do this. You bring out into the open. We have many little rules, and it's all to support our mindfulness, it's all to support our renunciation, and it's all to support this institution of monasticism. Some of these rules don't even make sense, to be honest. They're arbitrary, but it's just like, okay, I'm going to join that club, so I'm going to follow the rules. And never is ever, the way it's set up, no one ever points a finger at you. It's all on you to come forward with, oh, you know, my robe wasn't in the right place at the right time, whatever. I didn't sew up my hole in my robe in a timely manner, etc., etc., etc. It's a very small rule, not ethical, just sort of a training. But the whole impetus is just keeping the slate clean, bringing things out into the open, something to celebrate. The Buddha's words are, when one sees one's transgression, it is growth. It's such beautiful psychology. It's really the opposite of this idea of the way that many of us have been exposed to sin. It goes even farther than that. At one point, the Buddha is having a dialogue with a chief, sort of like a tribal chief, someone with some authority and status, and this person is a follower of the Jains at this time, and the Jains is another world religion, and the leader of the Jains, Nagata Nataputta, thank you, Nagata Nataputta, was alive at the same time as the Buddha and in the same region. There are many times that they have interactions. The Buddha was known to be such a brilliant debater. So a lot of times Nagata Nataputta would send one of his disciples to try and have a debate with the Buddha. And at this time, this is from the Connected Discourses, Sutta, Samyutta Nikaya 42, Sutta 8. And I will not read the whole sutta, it's very long, but there's a very important part where, at the beginning of the sutta, at one time the Buddha was staying near Nalanda and Pavarika's mango grove. Then Asabadaka's son, the chief, who was a disciple of the Jains, went up to the Buddha and sat down to one side. And then they have this long conversation where the Buddha starts by saying, hey, what does Nagata Nadaputa, what does he say about basically about karma? So they have this long conversation, and then the Buddha gets the information from the chief, and then he responds. So the information from the chief is that the Jain's teacher says that if you break one of these precepts, basically that you go to hell. There's very much an idea of sin and punishment. This is the Buddha's take on that concept. You could really say, like, Buddhism is the earliest psychology, and it's the most psychological of any of the world religions, and it's also the most spiritual psychology. Take some teacher. So this is the Buddha speaking in response to what the chiefs shared and teaching the chief. Take some teacher who has this doctrine in view that you've shared with me. Everyone who kills a living creature, steals, commits sexual misconduct, or lies goes to a place of loss, to hell. So these are the 4 ethical precepts. They're the same in the Jain's religion. And the Buddha goes on. So if this is the teaching, and there's a disciple who's devoted to that teacher, the disciple thinks, my teacher has this doctrine in view. Everyone who kills a living creature, steals, commits sexual misconduct, or lies goes to a place of loss, to hell. But I've killed living creatures. But I've stolen. But I've committed sexual misconduct. But I've lied. They get the view, I too am going to a place of loss, to hell. Here's the psychology. Buddha says, unless they give up that speech, that thought, let go of that view, they will be cast down to hell. So basically the Buddha is saying, if we are exposed to these kinds of teachings and then we take them on board and internalize them, that's hell. And that, if unless we can, get exposed to a different set of teachings, or somehow shake loose of that thinking, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's leading to harm. It's not going in a good direction. And then in the Buddha's teachings, but consider when a realized one, that's a Buddha, arises in the world, perfected, a fully awakened Buddha, accomplished in knowledge and conduct, holy, knower of the world, supreme guide for those who wish to train, teacher of gods and humans, awakened, blessed. In many ways, he criticizes and denounces killing living creatures, saying, stop killing living creatures. He criticizes and denounces stealing. He criticizes and denounces sexual misconduct. He criticizes and denounces lying, saying, stop lying. And there's a disciple who's devoted to that teacher. Then they reflect. In many ways, the Buddha criticizes and denounces killing living creatures, saying, stop killing living creatures. But I've killed living creatures to a certain extent. This is the psychology. That's not right. It's not good. And I feel remorse because of it. But I can't undo what I've done. Reflecting like this, they give up killing living creatures. And in future, they don't kill living creatures. That's how to give up this bad deed and get past it. Very, very beautiful, powerful teaching. That's all very, very, very forward leading. The past is done. when you begin to have remorse, this can be a very good thing, but you want that remorse to be impetus. You want that remorse to be a catalyst for making a change, period. You can't, I can't undo what I did. And so how do I work with this? I learn from it. And I deeply forgive myself, and I move forward. There are these two beautiful, they're Pali words. They're hard to translate. The Pali words are Hiri Otapa. I think Hiri, I'm going to translate Hiri as like compunction, and I would want to translate Otapa as conscientiousness. But I'll give a metaphor that illustrates what Hiri Otapa are. They're basically the Buddha describing our conscience. And the way that the Buddha is saying it can function when it's healthy and working the way that it can. Hiri Otapa, he calls them the guardians of the world. So when Hiri Otapa, these are psychological things. They're aspects of the mind, heart, and when they are cultivated and valued and used in a human life, they serve a function. And this metaphor comes from a wonderful nun that lives near Ottawa, Ayya Ahimsa, and that's where I initially became a nun. And she describes Hiri Otapa as Hiri is like the rear view mirror when you're driving, and Otapa is like the windshield when you're driving. So Hiri is that compunction. It's that oof. It's something arising from I really was feeling impatient, or I got angry with my children, or I maybe shouldn't have said that. I wish I made someone not look well. I could have I could have said that differently, or I didn't actually need to say anything. This is Hiri. It's the rear view mirror. But the purpose of it is to just this forward moving, positive, like, so great. I realize when this person gets talked about, I need to be more careful because I still got some residual hurt, and and then you work with it. And then the Otapa is this windshield, which is like the forward part. And this is the conscientiousness that that you're motivated to be your highest self possible. That going forward, you're going to try and be in touch with your heart, with your conscience, and take it to heart and respond to it and do the best you can. Very good. It's the most beautiful teaching as far as I'm concerned. I found it so, for me, so different. And it was so necessary in my own life and this is still something I would say it's one of my biggest areas of working with, of a reconditioning of not beating myself up and seeing things more in perspective and not collapsing and getting overwhelmed, but showing up to the table of like, yeah, I could do better. I want to do better, etc., etc. Yeah. So honestly, it's it's very personal for me, this particular topic, and I could go on, and I won't. Out of not afflicting others, I will stop. So, and let anyone that wants to make a comment or share a story or ask a question, or, anything. Yeah, Scott, please.
Well, while you were speaking about the Buddha's teachings, in my mind, I was comparing it to Catholicism. And I'm not a Catholic, but I've got a kind of a working understanding of how it all happens. And so, as the Buddha does, in the Catholic tradition, they've got covenants, the 10 Commandments, things that we shouldn't do. And if someone from that tradition breaches those commandments, they go to confession, and then they're given what's the word? Penance, which is like a ritual or something that addresses the sin that was done to kind of absolve them of the sin. That's my understanding. And then they're encouraged to move on and to lead a better life and not to break those laws again, right? So except for the middle part, it's kind of like Buddhism. The only thing that Buddhism doesn't do is have a confession and a penance. But in all of these religions, people are always encouraged to do better. So that's more of a comment, but is there maybe what I might be missing something here? Maybe there's something fundamentally different between the Christian religions and the Buddhist religions when it comes to the idea of sin. But to me, that's the fundamental difference, is that there's no confession and penance in Buddhism.
Well, except that I was trying to say at the beginning, Scott, that even the definition of sin, like what causes something to be a transgression, and in many of the world religions, it's because it would be a sin against God, whereas in Buddhism, it's because it's a source of suffering, it's a source of harm.
But aren't all those sins against God kind of pointed to, or aren't they also a cause of suffering for people on earth?
If you take them on board a lot, yeah, but I mean, they're like, even within the 10 Commandments, it's like, don't bow down to a graven statue. I mean, I can't point to a specific person that's being harmed by, or a homosexuality. Again, I don't see someone that's being harmed by two people of the same gender having a loving, supporting partnership. So,
and there's a lot of people in Christian faith that would agree with that. Like the Bible is so subject to interpretation. Some people interpret it as being against homosexuality, and other people don't. So it's
Pretty clear.
Is it?
It's very, very clear.
well, it's saying over and over that it's an unnatural. You have Sodom and Gomorrah.
It's absolutely
It's
explicit
Yeah, it's
on it, and
couldn't be more clear.
yeah. I mean, I appreciate what you're saying. Like the idea is the end goal is the same, but there's the way that it comes about in Christianity. I was a Bible school. I went to Bible
Okay, so
school,
you know this
and
scripture.
yeah, and it's kind of like the difference here is that one comes from the outside,
Yes.
and it's a law. For example, in Judaism, they don't give a crap about your inner state. It's all about your deeds. It's all about your outside. So Christianity changes that a bit. Yeah, but it's still coming in from the outside.
Yeah.
And at the very beginning, we're talking about, is there good or bad in Buddhism? There's good and bad in the Judeo-Christian thought. In Buddhism, if I understand correctly, it's not good and bad. It's not good and evil. It's about suffering.
Suffering and non-suffering.
Suffering and non-suffering, it seems like. And so there's a difference, and yeah, they're trying to get to that outcome. And there's some people that are very good at it because somehow they've kind of broken through that. Sorry for interrupting you.
Oh, this is good.
But it's like here, it's a different kind of it's getting at it from a place that's much easier. You don't have to be absolved of anything here.
Yeah, there's no repentance or penance, because the past is the past. And everything's connected, it's like if you raise children, it's the difference between a natural consequence that happens from an action that is maybe aggressive or thoughtless, versus some arbitrary, now I'm going to take your allowance away. These are very, very different. What the person that's receiving this training is learning. So Buddhism would all be about the natural consequences. They're really different. What they are producing internally, and Ronnie's right on the money. One is external and one is completely internally driven.
But I will say that in my experience in seeing different people, I've spent quite a bit of time in Israel and meeting Christians, Muslims, and Jews, and some people find grace.
Yes.
Some people really
Yes.
Transcend.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And it's like they really find that grace, which is a bit bizarre, but it's interesting. And but and they talk about grace, but it's kind of almost like an afterthought. Sorry.
Sujata.
Yeah, thank you, Ayya. Sort of to add to the discussion, sometimes the way that the different, like how the approach from a Christian community or individual is that there's a great deal of judgment about good and bad. And I've always felt when I was in that community, somehow I fell short of the mark and I was unworthy. And it felt quite harsh. And I find with the Buddha's teaching, it's gentler. There's, I think, shared chat in the chat about moving from guilt to growth.
Yeah.
And that it's more about skillful, unskillful, wholesome, unwholesome, and it removes that sense of not good enough.
Beautiful.
I want to say thank you. I have to go to work. I'm stretching my time. I'm going to be late, but this was exactly what I needed to hear today. So it was perfect timing. Thank you very much. I'll see you next time.
So happy
Thank
to have
you
you.
all. I will be back. Be sure of that. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think growing compassion. Oh, that would be perfect. So at the end of each session, there are 4 emotions that the Buddha says are the ones to cultivate. And they are metta, I'm going to say in Pali first, and then metta, karuna, mudita, and upekkha. And he calls them the divine abodes. Like when your heart mind is hanging out in these emotions, you're in the dwelling of the gods. It's very heavenly. It's very beautiful. And so metta is a benevolence. There's a deep sense of non-harm, of benevolence to all living beings unconditionally. And these are attitudes and orientations of the heart mind to cultivate. And then karuna often gets translated as compassion. It's basically metta, this benevolence. It's the benevolent response to people's suffering that you very, very much, just as I wish to be, feeling healthy and peace. Of course, all beings wish that. It's really understanding our deep sameness. And then mudita is sympathetic joy. It's basically this benevolent response to other people's joy. It's the exact opposite of jealousy. And the Buddha says this is the quickest way to uplift the heart. It's like, oh, I'm having a tough day, but invariably there's probably many people are having a really, really good day. Mudita at its highest would be like, oh, I didn't get the promotion, but Gertrude did. I can be so happy. And upekkha is the absolute highest. It's this just equanimity. It's an equipoise. It's just a really it's okay. It's just a balanced response. It's getting off the roller coaster, up, down, up, down, up, down, steady. So and throughout the month, week 1, we end with a very short metta contemplation, meditation. And now we're on week 2, so it'll be compassion. Week 2 of the month.
So first of all, if you can bring to mind someone you know who has great physical or mental suffering, and while being aware of their particular difficulties, direct these phrases to them. May you be free of your pain and sorrow. May you find peace. And now send the phrases to yourself. May I be free of my pain and sorrow. May I find peace. Now bring to mind someone who's been very supportive of you and send the phrases to them. May you be free of your pain and sorrow. May you find peace. Now bring to mind a neutral person, someone you pass on the street or a store clerk that you don't have any particular feelings towards, and send the phrases to them. May you be free of your pain and sorrow. May you find peace. Now bring to mind someone that you have a difficult relationship with, and send the phrases to them. May you too be free of your pain and sorrow. May you too find peace. May all beings be free of pain and sorrow. May all beings find peace. Remember that all beings face great potential suffering, no matter how fortunate their immediate circumstances may be. This meditation does not eliminate suffering. What we are doing is being able to acknowledge suffering, to open to it and respond to it with a tenderness of heart, which allows us to join with all beings and realize we are never alone. May the merit of our practice be shared with all sentient beings, named and unnamed. Ayya. It is. Yes. Blair, Tracy, Uriel. May all beings be well and happy. Thank you, everyone.